How's it going? I'm Andrew with Investors Hub, and first of all, I'm back from vacation and I still have my job, and that's pretty cool. And we're going to be talking with Ted Ohashi because it's Ted Tuesday, and we're going to be talking about the cannabis industry, like you probably guessed, and we're going to be chatting about, well, I'll bring up this graphic because I spent all this time making this animation. Not a huge amount of time, but some time. Anyway, and we're going to be talking about Kiaro and Lexaria. We're also going to be chatting about some of the things that are happening in cannabis legislation, and we're going to get his opinion on, what are the most important bits from cannabis legislation that he'd like to see whenever it comes to the cannabis industry from the business side of things. And he's also going to weigh in on an interesting fact on how Canadian cannabis systems are structured and whether or not that system will be applied here in the US. So if you like the video, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. You can follow us on Twitter, ihub_vision. And after a quick disclaimer, we'll hear from Ted. Please note that our videos are not designed to be direct investing advice. Our channel and our content should just be one stop on the journey of trying to find out where to put your money. So Ted, there's a variety of different bits of cannabis legislation that's floating around out there in the US legislature. You got the MORE Act, the SAFE Act, and Chuck Schumer's CAOA, the CAOA, which is a terrible acronym, by the way. But I was wondering, so obviously what everyone's hoping for is full legalization. But if you had to compromise on full legalization, what hot button issues within cannabis reform would you hold on to?
Well, I guess not answering that question directly, but the most important thing to me would be time. I think that what's happened here is Schumer's bill has delayed everything by about a year, roughly speaking. And so that to me is a costly year for a lot of companies. I think it's terrific for the US multi-state operators because it's another year in which they won't face competition from outside. So I would want to do things that got things done more quickly. The other thing is philosophically, I think with the approach that Schumer's taking, that hasn't worked so well in the history of cannabis legislation. Cannabis has been sort of one little baby step at a time moving forward. And Schumer seems to want to tie everything up into one bill and try and jam it through. And that's why, one of the reasons why he doesn't have all the votes that he needs to pass the bill were to come to the floor today. And so that's another issue. For me, I think the main issues for the industry are to put cannabis on a level playing field with everyone else. It's a legal activity in the states in which it's legislated. I think even the federal government has been acknowledging that for a while. And so to me, it's not fair that, say, the cannabis industry has more difficulty accessing banking services. For example, you can't go into a dispensary and make a purchase using your MasterCard or your Visa. They don't have a category for cannabis. And so I think that would be one of my hot buttons. I know other people are sympathetic to the social issues, and I think they're important too. But I'm coming at it more from an investment perspective. So the financial issues, the accounting issues that don't allow them to deduct expenses in the same way that other businesses do before they calculate their tax bill. And I mean, if you study the history of that, it's too long to go into right now. But it really goes back to a drug dealer 50 years ago pulled a fast one on the government, and the government had to pass legislation not to allow them to take all these deductions. And so that's how we ended up there. So, those are a couple of the hot issues from an investor's point of view. I understand the social issues are important as well. And I think those would be a high priority, particularly to a politician.
So I was reading your transcript from the call that you had with Kiaro that was in the Cannabis report, and you guys were talking about something I thought was really interesting. It was the relationship between, producers, wholesalers, and retailers up there in Canada, and how the majority of Canadian provinces have the government itself actually being the wholesaler that interposes itself between the producers and the retailers. But Kiaro's in a special place where they're actually like a commercial private business that operates as a wholesaler. So, how do you think that this Canadian model of distributing cannabis is going to affect their growth in the long term?
Well, I don't think it will affect them too much. I think most of the provinces jumped on the opportunity to be involved because governments always like that, and they look for chances to tax and generate revenue. But the other thing is they jumped into the liquor model, the liquor distribution model. And so, when they created the liquor distribution model, where all the liquor comes into a central place run by the government and then is sold out from that central place to distributors. When they created that model, it was a long time ago. It was what I call BC, before computers. And so today, I think with cannabis, for example, they have an opportunity to handle all of that without a government agency having to step into the middle of it. And so, of all the provinces in Canada, provinces and territories, I think there's 10 or 12 of them. One of them went in one direction, and the others all went with the liquor store model. So the province of Saskatchewan does not put itself in the middle of it. The wholesaling is a distinct part of the service that private sector provides. And from Kiaro's point of view, if the time comes when they can go into the US, for example, the US doesn't have centralized distribution of cannabis. And so they think the experience that they're gaining now will stand them in good stead when they have a chance to go into, say, Florida or New York or Texas or, any of the larger states. And so, yeah, it is interesting and it is different. And it puts them in a unique kind of position where the licensed producers, the cultivators, come to them or deal with them to be able to sell their products in Saskatchewan. And so it also helps them create these relationships with the licensed producers, which is also very helpful to what is basically a retail cannabis retail business.
So, whenever interstate commerce for cannabis, if when it gets turned on here in the United States, do you think that the U.S. is going to stick with their liquor style model, where you have producer, wholesaler, retailer, or do you think that it's going to be more freeform?
Well, so far it's been more freeform. The states haven't really interjected themselves along with their legalization legislation. In Canada, there's this, well, and I guess in the US too, there's this sort of territorial grab between various levels of government. And so the provinces, by our constitution, are given authority to govern what happens in their provinces. And so they jumped on that opportunity to play that role. And in fact, the federal government sort of dumped it on them because I think they had a sense of how complicated it was going to be, and they didn't want any part of it. They just rather tax the gross 10% and lay all the work off on everybody else. So, my guess is that so far the states in the U.S. haven't taken on the liquor distribution model, and so I rather suspect they won't.
So you had another cannabis report that came out today, which is August 10th, I believe. And so talk to us a little bit about like a standout part. Like what company do you want to pick out from that group to talk about?
Oh boy. Well, I've already talked about Kiaro because it's the latest recommendation for the model portfolio. I think a really interesting one, and I've talked about it before here, is a company called Lexaria. They have a really interesting technology that allows them to increase what's called a bioavailability and the speed at which a drug is delivered into a person's system when they ingest it, as opposed to injecting it. And so with smokeless tobacco, for example, with nicotine, you want that speed of delivery, and you want the bioavailability, which means more of what you actually ingest gets into your system. It doesn't get cleaned out in your digestive system and through your kidneys and liver and all of that. And so they are on a program right now that sees them running a series of tests on their technologies in different areas. They came out with positive news with respect to antiviral treatments, and the market really liked that. I mean, the stock was really strong. They've also come out with positive news on hypertension, CBD, and their technology in terms of lowering blood pressure. And those results were very positive. But for whatever reason, the market didn't seem to be that enthusiastic about it. So that's one thing that I've sort of zeroed in on is, if you look at the hypertension market, it's huge. Like half of Americans have high blood pressure, and a quarter of that half aren't treating it or don't have it under control. And so, it's a gigantic market out there. And I think Lexaria is a company that over the summer, as they make additional announcements, their stock will do very well. It's LEXX on the NASDAQ, and certainly one to watch here.
So do you have any final thoughts?
No, not really. I think that the cannabis stocks, which have been correcting since about February, are in the process of bottoming out here. And so I think as we get through August and into September, we'll see the market turning. And it's always easier for individual stocks to swim with the tide. And if that tide is going in a favorable direction, that's always a good thing. So I'm really quite optimistic for the cannabis group moving forward from here. I think we're at a low level, and I think the signs are there that it's turning.
Do you own positions in any of the companies mentioned?
No, I don't.
So thanks for watching, and if you hadn't already, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. You can follow us on Twitter, iHub_vision, and I'll see you again soon.